This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
It's the Blood Red podcast, courtesy of the Liverpool Echo. I'm Guy Clarke. Welcome along. No festive football for the Reds, but a watching brief as both Man City and Chelsea took the gifts on offer to them. Coming up, we'll discuss the fallout from Boxing Day, analyse Liverpool's AFCON boost, and preview the visit to the King Power. To get into all of that, as well as our team selector and match predictor, we have the Squires and Hannah Pinnock. I have to say to both of you, first of all, Merry Christmas. Hope you've had a good festive time. And, well, Theo, it was a bit weird this year, wasn't it? No Boxing Day football for Liverpool fans to indulge in.
I was loving it all until you wheeled me out to talk about Leicester City again. Bored of talking about the Foxes now. Seems we've been doing this all month. It was quite nice. Like, you think every year we have Jurgen Klopp saying we played too much festive football. You need to break it up more. And it looked like this fixture list was going to be really hard on Liverpool. But by just taking that one game out of it, it's quite nice to be able to just sit back, relax. You can have your Christmas dinner, you can have your leftovers, your turkey sandwiches or whatever your presents you got. Just have a nice chilled day, look at the scores, and there's no stress involved. It wasn't ideal in terms of results. So, Chelsea got the win, City got the win. Chelsea now level on points. Liverpool, City are 6 points behind. No, City are 6 points ahead of Liverpool. But they've got the game in hand and they can just relax. I suppose I get why fans don't want to see it go. Like Jurgen Klopp said it in his press conference today. Boxing Day is fine. It's tradition. I have no issues playing on Boxing Day, but there is too much around the whole festive period. If you want to keep your tradition, keep Boxing Day. Just get rid of this next one on the 28th, the 29th, or whenever it is. But it made a nice change, and I suppose it's something I'm going to have to get used to because I'm not sure how the winter break falls next year with the World Cup. It's been nice to have a bit of time off now and a bit of time off then before it all gets going again.
Yeah, see, I disagree on that regarding festive football. I think you get rid of more football, the kind of the mid. Like, for example, you said being wheeled out to talk about Leicester City again. If the League Cup weren't a thing, certainly for sides in Europe, wouldn't have had that game midweek prior to it. The FA Cup third round this year is actually a little bit later. So have sort of 3 or 4 games around this week and make it a thing, make it a challenging week. I think the issue is there's too many weeks already with the Champions League, with then the League Cup, with Premier League putting a midweek fixture round in only a couple of weeks ago as well, that actually all of a sudden it is just the norm and it's continuing to be that way the whole time. But Hannah, what about
kudos to Arsenal then for just not qualifying for Europe to make it easier for themselves.
Well, come on, don't fire shots when they're the side winning the games that are in front of them at the minute. So let's not be firing too many shots. Hannah, what about yourself? I have to say, I just lost myself yesterday, Boxing Day, trying to kind of wonder what football was on. As Theo mentioned, my beloved Arsenal were, but there wasn't many else on.
Yeah, no, I was supposed to go to Anfield for the Leeds game, so that was a bit gutting. But I stayed local and I went and watched Cheltenham Town get beat 2-0 by Plymouth, which wasn't too bad. But it was weird not having Liverpool to watch on Boxing Day, but I think it's a welcomed break, if anything. Not ideal because you've got to now reschedule that Leeds game somewhere else and cause a bit of congestion elsewhere, but I'm sure it was a welcome break and it gets some players back after being out with COVID as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I suppose we're best to kind of talk on that, and we'll get into Jurgen Klopp's press conference in a bit and react to that. But before we move on from Boxing Day, you mentioned it there, Theo, that Man City did win. They played Leicester, of course, 1-6-3. They were 4-0 up at half-time after then being given a bit of a scare, Leicester getting it back to 4-3 before City then did find another gear. And Chelsea also getting 2 penalties in their game away at Aston Villa and winning 3-1. You mentioned before City now 6 points clear. So what's the feeling regarding that? Is it at this stage of the season better to have the points on the board, or there is that game in hand for Liverpool, albeit, as Hannah says, it's going to have to get rearranged into another area of the season that could see a fixture pile up?
Traditionally, you'd say it's always better to have points on the board, and I think historically it is better to have points on the board, but it's just not the case with Liverpool. Like the 3 times we've seen them go close for the title and not win it in 13-14, 8-9 and 18-19. They were top at Christmas. They were the ones in the driving seat. It was City and United who had the games in hand, and they just managed to claw it back and usurp them at the top of the table. But then this is a different Liverpool now. This is a Liverpool team that has won the Premier League title before, and they're against a Manchester City team that has won many Premier League titles before. So it's a bit different in that context of the fact that you wouldn't say you can see City losing it under the pressure or anything if Liverpool start getting a run of games with the momentum. It's one where we're used to seeing City just come into the second half of the season and win every week. Like the one year they didn't was when they were miles off the pace and Liverpool won the league quite easily. But you think of 18-19, I think they won 18 of 19 games in the second half of the season. And remember doing podcasts or whatever, thinking, surely they can't keep this up. Surely Liverpool have done enough in the first half of the season to finish at the top. You can't just lose one game all year and not win the league. And sure enough, the consistency that these teams are producing, that this is what happens. 6 points, it does feel like a big gap at this stage of the season. But a lot can still happen. Like Liverpool's still got to go to the Etihad. I think Liverpool, they've got Chelsea on the 2nd, don't they? And then Chelsea have got to go to City a couple of weeks after that. You throw in the Africa Cup of Nations, where it might only be a couple of Premier League games, but Chelsea will lose Mendy, Liverpool will lose Salah, Mane and Keita, City will lose Mahrez. There's all this stuff going along in the background. And then Champions League progress. I think we can say at the moment it's 3 teams in the title race. It does kind of feel like Chelsea are edging away slightly, but that will be because of COVID and because of injuries. But they've still got a hell of a lot of talent in their squad. But they've still won 3-1. And while it might be a couple of dodgy penalties, where it just feels a bit dodgy because you always, you've won because of a couple of them. They're getting the players back. Like Lukaku was back. Was he off the bench or restart? I'm not quite sure, but he's back in the squad now. And we've got so many talented players there. They had the experience of winning the Champions League last year. You just get to February, March time, and then you see who's still going strong in the Champions League, what your quarter-final draw is, and then you can sort of weigh up your priorities. It might feel bad at the moment. They've got to rearrange this Leeds game. They're going to have to rearrange an Arsenal game as well because it clashes with the League Cup final. So even if they don't get there, they can't play that weekend. So that there will be a couple of games Liverpool got hanging over their heads come springtime. They might try and get one in earlier. They might try and get one in, I don't know, if they don't go far in the FA Cup. But then that could be an advantage. It might feel better to have points on the board, but at the same time, if you can build momentum and really put the pressure on, it's not ideal playing 2 times a week, every week at this stage when you're getting tired. But usually you find the teams get a bit more life towards them in the spring when they can relax a bit more, when everyone's just hungry, got the prizes in sight. Hopefully it works in Liverpool's favour because it's worked against them in the past.
Yeah, I have to say, I think this season, maybe, I don't know how you feel, Hannah, that points on the board is kind of the most important thing for teams. A number of Premier League managers over the last round of fixtures now, when their teams have been in action, kind of saying that at the end of the day, it may be COVID that decides this title rather than the action really on the pitch, because we are only in December, of course. January and February, winter months as well. I'm sure there'll be more and more cases and more postponements that do come into play. And as we say, if Liverpool already have one, yes, they might be fresh for the Leicester game, which we're going to get into, but there are going to be other games that get pushed back later on.
Yeah, it's an opinion that I've held myself as well for the last few weeks, that COVID is going to have a major say on who wins the title, depending on whether or not your games get postponed, but also, where those rearranged fixtures fall. Because if fixtures are rearranged at a time where, you've got big games either side of them, then that can influence things as well. And it also influences, the sort of teams that you end up facing. Leicester, normally have not too bad of a record against Manchester City, but the team that Brendan Rodgers had to put out, against City yesterday with all the injuries that they have and COVID playing a part as well, it can influence the sort of team that you have to face. And I know Leeds have struggled with, injuries and COVID themselves. And, when Chelsea faced them, it wasn't a necessarily strong Leeds side at all. But then, it can come to a point where Liverpool face them in a few weeks or whenever that fixture gets rearranged for, and you end up facing a much stronger Leeds side. So it all, it influences so many things basically, and you can see it having a major influence on who ends up winning the league. Obviously, whoever wins it has got to, if Man City win it, you can see the form that they've put together, the run that they're on, and you struggle to see them losing a game at any point. But when you've got such a tight title race and 3 teams in it, and a matter of points are separating them, COVID will will have a say, unfortunately.
I will say it's luck of the draw, isn't it? Because if you look at the league table, Liverpool have only had one game called off. So Arsenal have just had the first one called off. Chelsea somehow managed to play through it all, despite the fact that they had lots more absentees than Liverpool.
Because they've got like 25 international players.
Yeah, because they survive it. But like these teams at the top, they're the ones with the big squads. And I'm not sure if we are going to get into the 5 subs debate that came up in the press conference today. But that is the other side of it. The Premier League sides at the top of the table can cope and that they can get through. Like Liverpool had this mini outbreak. I think it was 4 players, and now it's up to 7 cases. But it's a youth team player and 2 coaches. A lot of the teams have suffered a lot worse. And the fact that even with that outbreak, look, the worst that happened to Liverpool was they dropped points at Tottenham. They got a decent draw with 10 men when they were playing 2 players back from injury, first starts in like 2 months, and a kid on his first Premier League start in midfield. And that's a really respectable result. It's just because if you put it in the context of Manchester City winning every week, it feels even more of a blow. But then you look at the table and the teams that have got these games in hand piling up, it's going to have a much bigger say on that relegation battle. Like Burnley have already got 4 games in hand. Watford have got 3. Leeds, I think they've got 1 at the moment, but that's going to pile up because they're going to have their outbreak at the moment, so that could lose more. While they won't have that issue of having to fit them in around European football or anything, you imagine it's going to be much more decisive at the end of the season. Like if you're getting relegated on COVID, that's going to be a rather messy situation. But you've just got to be thankful that while Liverpool, some fans will say the squad's not big enough, Jurgen Klopp and Pep Linders are very happy with the squad they put together, and the kids have proven they're talented enough. Like how many times, like last year, for example, where we writing off, or fans are writing off players like Naby Keita, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, Divock Origi, Takumi Minamino, Costa Tsimikas. I think all of them have come in this season and they've done really well. They're probably getting more opportunities than you'd expect them to do, but they're showing why they're Liverpool Football Club players and that they can step up. And when you have to go beneath them in terms of the numbers and you're looking at your Nico Williams or your Tyler Morton, even likes of Owen Beck, they're stepping up as well. It's whether they can do it consistently over a whole season, because while Liverpool might have to turn to Tyler Morton far more than they would like to, Manchester City can go, oh, we're missing 1 international, we'll just put another international in. And they've not even had to deal with COVID yet. But yeah, it could just be 1 outbreak could really open things up at the top if it happened at City, because before Chelsea's, they looked like they were the clear favourites at the early stage of the season. Historically, with the experience, you'd always favour City to come back on top. But when you've got that squad and that depth, it is always going to be hard to overtake them. Klopp said that himself today, and that's without the pandemic, without COVID cases.
Yeah, Chelsea also have to factor in the Club World Cup in February as well, don't they? So that'll be another sort of thing that they'll have to contend with. Liverpool, of course, had their own issues with that, with the League Cup, as it were, away at Aston Villa. Moving on, though, now kind of onto the next point, come back to you on this one, Theo, is the African Cup of Nations that Liverpool have got somewhat of a boost ahead of it. It wasn't all too sure as and when the clubs had to release the players for, but thankfully for Jurgen Klopp, they are going to be about for the game with Chelsea.
Yeah, they are. He's confirmed it in the press conference today. I think we'd already known anyway that they were going to be available for that Chelsea game. But that's huge. Like they've got, I think, a week, isn't it, before the Cup of Nations starts that Chelsea game is. And while it means you're going to be without them, I'd imagine for the Arsenal first leg, I'm not sure they'll be quite as generous enough to let them stay an extra couple of days for a game that could be so decisive in the title race. You want your 2 best strikers. And with Naby Keita, if he turns up and he's at his best, then he's got a very good chance, a very good case of being in Liverpool's first choice midfield. It's just whether he's fit, whether he's in form, whether he can keep it going. But then you could also say, well, Chelsea have got the first choice keeper. Like if they'd had Kepa in net, he's not been the best in the past. That could have been a boost for Liverpool as well. It works both ways. But as I was saying before, these squads are strong enough that they can still get by. Like if Kepa's your reserve keeper and you spent 70, 80 million on him, you think he's still a bit talented despite a few dodgy moments. But that's what pushes the pressure on Minamino, Divock Origi if he's back from an injury. But then Firmino's back now. Diogo Jota is in sensational form. Liverpool should have enough. And the way the fixtures are falling, it's so kind to them, I think, for how bad it could have been. Like the League Cup semi-final, they've given them those extra days recovery from the Chelsea game. The only backlog, I think, is Brentford, but then Brentford got pushed back anyway. Yeah, you play your kids in the FA Cup, but it's as manageable as it could be. And then you've still got this mini winter break at the end of the month. The FA Cup, I don't think it's until February, which is a bit later than normal if they did get through. By then, you've got Salah, Mane and Keita back, unless some new isolation rules for travels come in by then or anything. It's as good for Liverpool as it could be. But the big concern is you're still losing your best striker, your best forward, Mohamed Salah, best player in the world, on reputation, your second best one. Whether it's still the second best one come the end of the season, we'll have to have that debate at another time. But it looks like Jota could be stealing that mantle from Sadio Mane. There's enough there in reserve, but it's still intimidating. And we know Salah's contract, that's all up in the air. We don't know what his future holds. It'll be interesting, I suppose, to have these 2 or 3 games without him, because it'll be the first time that he's missed decent games. I think he had, 1 game out of COVID last season. He's only missed 2 or 3 league games in his entire Liverpool career. Champions League-wise, he's only missed the Barcelona 4-0 because was it concussion or something? He just doesn't miss games for Liverpool. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see just how good they are without him, even if it is only for a 2-3 week game spell next month.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the points there that Theo was making, Hannah, is kind of the fixture list. And I suppose looking at it after the Chelsea game, there's a 2-week kind of a break until the Reds are back in Premier League action. Between that are the 2 EFL Cup semi-final legs with Arsenal, the 3rd round in the FA Cup against Shrewsbury at Anfield as well. But then even looking beyond that, it's Brentford at Anfield, a trip down to Selhurst Park, where, of course, Liverpool won 7-0 last year. Leicester at home, who they seem to be playing every week. He's on the 10th of February after that. So there will be a bit of a break even before that 10th of February game could be on the 5th of February, an FA Cup 4th round tie. But the fixture list has been kinder to Liverpool than maybe it would have been anticipated or feared.
Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with how it's turned out. And you were thinking at the start of the season how scary it would have been to have lost Salah and Mane for up to a month, and you're thinking that could be decisive. But as it turns out, it probably won't have as big of an influence as we anticipated. Them still being here for that Chelsea game is massive. That was probably most people's biggest concerns. If they did have to go much earlier and they missed that big game against Chelsea, then I think it would have been a big problem. I think still, for me, what concerns me about AFCON is potential injuries. Obviously, players can get injured at any point playing for Liverpool, but when you start going abroad and with the international teams, Liverpool's record with that isn't particularly great when you're thinking about players, different training regimes, different fixture schedules, that can all have an influence, and probably less so for Salah and Mane. Their injury record, especially Salah's is exceptional. They're always available, but for Keita, probably a bit more of an issue. So
touch wood there, Hannah. Don't drink Salah.
I don't want to jinx it, but I think that's probably what, in terms of the fixture schedule and the games that they'll be missing through playing at AFCON, it's been very kind to Liverpool, but we know that injuries tend not to be given our luck. So that's probably what I'm most worried about, is just I won't be able to relax completely until they're all back from AFCON and they're all fit and ready to go for February.
What's your feeling regarding Salah being away anyway? Theo sort of seems to be a bit intrigued to see who can step up perhaps and show what they can do. He's obviously been such a huge player during his time at Anfield, but I suppose it speaks volumes of the way in which Diogo Jota's kind of taken on the mantle of being part of the Liverpool attack, that actually probably a lot of people are excited to see what he can maybe do as being the main man while Salah's away.
Yeah, I mean, losing your top goal scorer and the league's top goal scorer at any point of the season is not ideal. But I think, given that it's only, you look at the Arsenal game and the Shrewsbury game and the FA Cup, and you're thinking, it'll be hit and miss whether or not Salah would play a part in those games anyway. Given that, it's League Cup semi-final, so wouldn't have been surprised if Salah had played some part in it. But for Shrewsbury especially, it's a game that, Klopp will probably look at and, if anything, it'd start from the bench. But yeah, missing him and losing him at any point is not ideal, but it's an opportunity, really. It's an opportunity for the likes of Jota, the likes of Firmino, and the likes of Minamino and Origi as well, that, have shown glimpses. Minamino's late equaliser against Leicester the other night was exceptional, and probably a huge confidence boost for him as well. And this would have been an ideal time for Origi, so hopefully he'll be back fit and ready to go as well. But it's just an opportunity really, and given Jota's form, it's not as concerning. If we hadn't quite had anyone that was quite hitting those levels and scoring as many goals as Jota is, then maybe you're sort of looking at that and thinking, where are we going to get our goals from? But ultimately, Jota is stepping up, and it is an opportunity for other players to gain a bit of form as well. So I'm not as concerned, and like I said, it's games that, especially the cup games, he might have missed anyway. But Brentford, I mean, given the previous match against Brentford earlier in the season, probably a lot harder than it looks, but their sort of form's dropped off a bit recently. So ultimately, it's not like it's your Chelsea's, your Manchester City's, your Man United's, where you absolutely need your best players. So as long as, like I said, it's them coming all back fit and ready to go, and not picking up any injuries really.
Do you want another AFCON boost before we move on?
Go on
then. Senegal and Guinea are in the same group, so I reckon you should get Mane and Keita to just go to the teammates. Right, be kind. Don't do anything to him. You protect him. I don't care who's on our opposite team. And I think for Naby Keita, go and put an upset. Knock Senegal out in the group stages. Potentially 3 teams can get through. So just make sure they don't score many goals. Send Sadio home early. Makes January even easier for Liverpool. Naby can go all the way. Naby can go and win the Cup of Nations. I don't think we've got any such luck with Egypt's group. I think they're in with Nigeria, Sudan, and Guinea. You know how good I am with pronunciation. You're going to have to try and save me here, Guy. Bissau.
Yeah, I'll just let you do what you do.
Cheers, mate.
I'll also say the rest of us at the Blood Red podcast don't condone Theo alleging that match fixing should go on between Guinea and Senegal there.
That wasn't match fixing at all. That was just saying don't 2-foot Sadio Mane and don't 2-foot Naby Keita. To be fair, Naby Keita would get injured even without the 2-foot, depending on.
He'd probably be the one doing the 2-footing and get injured.
But just protect each other. Make sure one of you comes home early. Everyone's happy, apart from the team that gets knocked out.
Yeah, they're not too happy. Right, in terms of the press conference, then let's get our teeth into it. And I suppose one of the main take-homes from it, as you've already referenced, was Jurgen Klopp backing calls for 5 substitutes to return for the remainder of the Premier League season. I mean, to me, it feels as though the Premier League trying to jump the gun and be too clever for their own good once more at the beginning of the season, saying, no, we're not going to go with 5 subs. Almost as though the pandemic has just disappeared and it only affected one season. The rest of the top 5 leagues kept it in. And now I have to say, surely you're at risk of jeopardising the competition, that you played half of it without 5 substitutes. And now there's talk to bring it back in. It seems sensible and logical. Should have been done from the start, no?
Yeah, it should, but it always seems to be because Sean Dyche is having a moan and they don't want to get Sean Dyche angry. I'm sure there are other managers, like Klopp's come and said you need 14 clubs majority, isn't it, to get it in, and they don't have that. But it always seems to be Sean Dyche who's the one shouting off, saying why he doesn't want it because his squad's not big enough to have these 5 substitutes.
But why do they have 9 subs then? Why keep?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And like we've looked at the last few weeks when you've had like Chelsea having to put 5, 6 subs, or Everton have to raid the under 15s just to fill the bench. It's just, it isn't really adding up. I understand. I think it's with those sides, it isn't that they can't have the numbers. They accept they might have to have some games that only put 4 or 5 subs out there. But it's because they could get relegated because Liverpool or Man City can just name another 9 subs. They can throw 5 of them on. And it's a selfish reasons looking after themselves, isn't it, for these lesser clubs who don't have that depth. But then it's about looking after your players as well, because if you've got players who are coming back from Corona or if they're coming back from injuries, you can't just put them straight back in for 90 minutes. Like we've heard about the 4 Liverpool players who've had COVID, they're going to be back. Thiago, Jones, Fabinho and Van Dijk. Fortunately, by the sounds of it, they didn't have any symptoms. So they're as good a condition as they can be, but they haven't trained whilst they've been in isolation. They'll have done their own gym work, whatever you're sure, but they're not going to have done proper training. And you think, well, they should be able to feature against Leicester. Van Dijk, Fabinho and Jones, they were in training before Christmas. Thiago was back yesterday. But you're still thinking, you can't start Thiago tomorrow. That's too quick of a turnaround. Like, it's about protection. But if you have 5 subs, like we're seeing in the League Cup, like we're seeing in the Champions League, it just means, all right, Al's gone. we can take someone off. Like Jordan Henderson, he was ill. He missed the Spurs game. Came back in for the League Cup game. He probably wasn't 100%. They got an hour out of him. Then they could take him off. Then they could manage the other players around him. It becomes a whole new tactical battle, isn't it? And some teams just don't have the depth to combat that. But then, is it not the same for these lesser teams in the Premier League as it is in the Football League? You'll have to tell me, do the EFL still have 5 subs in the Championship, League 1, League 2? Because I know they did last year, didn't they? Did that go this year?
Yeah, I'm 99% sure that's gone, yeah.
But the fact that they were happy to do it last year when the Premier League didn't.
The thing for me, though, that I don't understand is all the Premier League clubs still have a 25-man squad limit. We've had now 3 transfer windows already. January, obviously a matter of days away, will be a 4th window. There is opportunity for these clubs. Forgive me for thinking that the Premier League's full of poor clubs that can't spend resource to bring players in. If you're scared of relegation, bring players in on loan to make sure that you fill your 25-man squad. Other than that, it's under 21-year-old players, which all clubs are able to play as many of them as they want in and around the rules anyway. So I don't buy it. I don't understand it. Maybe that's too simplistic from me to say, but I can't see why when we're talking about player welfare. And I mean, since Jordan Henderson's come out and spoken about it, the voice of reason, it seems, on so many topics, Hannah, that every other Premier League player or manager who's spoken about it has said, yeah, we need to look after the players more. And yet the 5 substitutes thing still isn't happening.
Yeah, I think it says a lot when, like you said, the other leagues around Europe carried on with that rule. And obviously it was brought in at a time when, football was restarting again after COVID, and there was going to be a huge amount of fixtures in a short space of time. But, sort of reaching that sort of crisis level at the moment, really, with the amount of games that are being, postponed and then going to be rescheduled and everything like that. And I think it absolutely makes sense to bring it back in, but I get your point as well that it's not been here all season, and it seems a bit ridiculous that they didn't carry on with it initially when everyone else was. But I think I completely agree with it, to be honest, and I can sort of see both sides. I can understand from the likes of Burnley's perspective, where they quite haven't got the squad, and you can sort of see how it can advantage the clubs like Liverpool and Man City, where they have got the players that they can bring on and impact games and everything like that. Whereas teams like Burnley that don't quite have that same level of squad and the amount of players that they can't utilize that and they can't make the most of it. But I don't see why that should stop and impact everyone else and stop the likes of Liverpool and Man City protecting the players that they do have, because like you said, John Henderson's the voice of reason here, and the players' welfare that should always be the utmost importance. And ultimately at the moment, when you're looking at the amount of games that have been rescheduled, and we all know how intense the Christmas schedule is, especially in a non-COVID season, but how it's been in the last couple of years, and particularly this season when squads are thin enough as it is, and players are picking up more injuries and players are absent, and just to have that option from the bench where if you have got a player that's come back from COVID that you can chop and change and limit their game time, whereas without the option for extra substitutions you might not be able to do. So I think it's something that absolutely makes sense, but I guess it shouldn't really take until hitting a bit of a crisis point that you reintroduce it. You should read the room almost, and you're looking across Europe, and other leagues and other competitions have carried on with it, so why hasn't the Premier League?
Well, English football's always been behind with these sorts of things. Like I remember when Rafa was in charge at Liverpool, he was bemoaning the fact that they're only allowed 5 substitutes, whereas the teams on the continent, they were having 7 in their domestic leagues. And you think, well, England finally embraced having 7. I think the end of the noughties potentially, and it's only now they've gone up to 9 in response to COVID. But then you look at the continent, I'm not sure if it's all of them, but I know Italy especially, they can have 12 substitutes. But then their answer to that would be their academies are supposedly better. Like they give youngsters game time. They prove they're good enough for the first team, whereas English football has never really been great at bringing these youngsters through, are talented enough. That's why you've seen so many go to Germany to get that game time. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because there's so much money on it. They don't want to give these opportunities to the younger players. They have to rely on the tried and trusted when it comes down to staying in the Premier League, when you know how much that can be worth to a side. or dropping down into the Championship. But it doesn't mean if you've got these younger players on the bench, you have to play them. It's just part of the experience. Like we've seen however many players Liverpool have got who are younger, who've been in the squad this season. They're not played every game. When they have played, some of them haven't the best of times. But it's still being part of that first team environment, and it makes a big difference for them. I think Burnley, their academy can't be that bad. They must have some young players they can put on a bench to fill a bench. And while
I would say as much the problem, though, would be the fact that your club's lower down. Let's not just pick on Burnley. Let's say Newcastle, let's say Watford, let's say Norwich, sort of Southampton, whatever. They might be, and Southampton probably a decent example with the fact that they've got Brower on loan.
They've got a great academy as well.
But what I mean is they might vote against it, thinking there's more chance of us being able to get some inter-Premier League loan players come to us who will actually be able to see the first team, like Armando Broja, who's gone from Chelsea to Southampton on loan, rather than, actually, no, Chelsea will keep him about. I mean, Chelsea are a different case, aren't they? Because they loan out 500 players each summer. But a case of, right, these guys might otherwise be making up the numbers in the other Premier League squads, but we'll get them to join us. But I do just find it all baffling. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of it because it's half your outfield team you can change. But when you're in uncertain times, and we're talking about player welfare and we're going to cram all of these games in, it feels as though concessions do have to be made. But before we run out of time, let's actually address the game that's going to be taking place at the King Power. Theo, I'll come to you. And only a couple of seasons back in Liverpool's title winning season, Liverpool, of course, went to Leicester, won 4-0. It was the pin-up display of the campaign. Is something likewise needed against Brendan Rodgers' side ahead of this one, or is it just a case of get the points and try and close that gap to Man City?
Needed. It'd be nice, but not really. It doesn't matter how they do it this time. It's just about getting those points. Like 2 years ago, it was probably the first defining victory where you could rest up and feel, yeah, Liverpool are going to win this league. Back in the times before we had to worry about pandemic null and voiding it or anything like that, like there were fears that December would be the end of Liverpool. They were playing all these competitions, 2-3 games a week. They had to go Qatar, come back. And then despite all of that, the fly-in and the change of climates, the time difference, they just went and battered the side that was second in the table at the time. And it was a brilliant performance. And I think it was the first seed. They're like, yeah, we can rest easy. This is Liverpool's year. I know no one wanted to publicly admit it until probably after the United game. But that's because they've been burnt before when the fans have started singing, we're going to win the league. But then you think back to last year, the trip to Leicester was pretty defining as well. Like Liverpool got through, was it January? They finally brought in some centre-backs. Think, we can go for the title again now. Got that strength and depth back. We can actually play centre-backs at centre-back. And then they were just awful. Well, they weren't awful, but it fell apart at Leicester. A couple of defensive howlers. And you think, this is going to be a struggle just to get top four. No, we know they turned it around. Now, it seems too early for it to be a defining fixture. Because it is 3 teams in the mix, it's defining if you lose. Because even with that game in hand still, if City have got a 6-point advantage or 9-point advantage, whatever, in these weeks, depending on the results fall, that is a lot to make up. You just need to keep the length and the gap on them the same. You just need to make sure you're breathing down the necks and in contention. But they don't need to send out this big statement. Like City were sending out a statement at half-time. They were 4-0 up. They end up winning 6-3, and that's still a pretty convincing victory. But it seems a bit shaky too because they've shipped 3. But then these teams are scoring so many goals. At the moment, it is just about getting the victories. It's not going to take any knocks to them at the moment. It's in a couple of months' time. Like Liverpool went and did a similar job to Chelsea, Stamford Bridge, next week. That is more of a statement to the rest of the division. Leicester, they're just a bit of not even a fallen giant now. They're just not what they were. Not sure what's gone wrong under Rodgers, apart from they've had a lot of injuries. But yeah, the fact that they're nowhere near being in Champions League contention compared to the last 2-3 years, it says a lot about what's changed there. But yeah, get the points, get the win. Doesn't matter if it's 4-0, 1-0, 3-2. As long as it ends in a Liverpool win, we're happy. Same as last week, it might have been penalties. It didn't matter how the result ended up as long as it came Liverpool's way.
What's your take on Leicester then, Hannah? Because as Theo said there, they do seem to have fallen away. What the stat was over the last 2 seasons, no side had spent longer in the top 4 than Leicester City. I don't even think they've spent any time in it this season, have they? I wouldn't be sure, but they obviously have had a lot of injuries. And don't seem to maybe pose the threat they once did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to completely jinx it here, but you almost do feel like it's an ideal time to play Leicester. I mean, I think the almost comeback against Manchester City, I think should serve as a warning, really, that even though they are depleted, even though they are struggling with injuries, they are still very capable of having that fighting spirit and potentially being able to cause an upset. But given the players that they are missing, I think, and the fact that we are going to be a bit more full strength than what we were in the Carabao Cup game. Obviously, they very nearly had us at Anfield the other night, when you think about the goals that Vardy scored. But then ultimately, we're going to have our first choice defence back, and, going to have some key midfielders back in there when you think about the likes of Fabinho and Henderson as well. And maybe Thiago can play a small part in some way. So I think it's going to be a very, very different game to what the Carabao Cup game was. But, I think, like I said, that the Man City game should serve as a warning, but it is an ideal time to play them as a whole, really, because of how they are struggling at the moment. And it is usually when you sort of look at the fixture list, you do look at the Leicester games as this is going to be a difficult one, this is going to be a challenge. And times before we've been facing them as title rivals ultimately, and at the moment they're nowhere near it. So it is a bit of a weird case with Leicester, because they have been up there for the last few years. They've been competing for the top four and at times competing for the title before they sort of fall away a bit. And maybe that's a squad issue, but I think injuries have certainly played a large part in it overall. But yeah, it is a must win for Liverpool, and I completely agree with Theo. I don't care how we do it. I don't need a dramatic sort of big scoring game like they had against, or like Man City had against them. You just need a win. It's something that I've seen a lot. I can't remember who said it, but you can't win the title in over Christmas, but you can definitely lose it. And if we lose against Leicester and start falling away from Manchester City, then it, you struggle to see how we'll catch them back up, even with a game in hand. So it is this period at the moment where every game is ultimately a must win, and like I said, don't care how we do it, just get that win.
Yeah, most definitely. Right, time then to get into the team selector then. Theo, do you want to kick us off? I'll actually let you even pick the goalkeeper in your back four.
Oh, is that a Christmas treat, is it?
Exactly. It's going to be a big decision to make.
Alisson in goal. It's not really a difficult one, despite Kelleher's heroics against them last week. Trent's at right back. Tsimikas is at left back. And then you're just hoping that nothing happens to him, because Nico Williams or James Milner at left back against Chelsea is not really worth thinking about. But yeah, Tsimikas at left back. Oh, I would like to think Van Dijk's fit enough to start. He's had a few days training. They've not had any symptoms. Only Liverpool's medical staff can say if they're really all the lads are ready to start. But surely he's as one who's going to have as good a chance as any. But then whatever States had on his body with the injury coming back from that. And then it's up in the air with who starts alongside him. Joe Gomez didn't have his best night last week, so it won't be him. But Konate did so well coming on. And then Joel Matip, he's had a good season so far. It's pretty much a statement on who is your first choice centre-back pairing. And the fact that they don't play Chelsea until Sunday, it's not as though Klopp would be tempted to rest Matip for this one, to have him for that one, because he's still got the extra couple of days to recover, get back on the training field. I think Matip is still clinging on to that first team spot, first choice partnership slot by the skin of his teeth. Konate is knocking at the door, and he's not doing it as any chances harm when he comes in and he plays as well as he has done in the last few weeks. But as it stands, it's just Matip's. But then if Van Dijk's not up to it, you'd have no problems with it being Konate and Matip together.
Yeah, see, I was thinking maybe Konate would come in for this one, given the pace of Jamie Vardy. But what do you think, Hannah?
I mean, I think in any situation, if Van Dijk's available, you play Van Dijk. But I can sort of see the reasoning there of, it's been Matip and Konate, bar the Leicester game, for the last few Premier League games, whilst Van Dijk has been out with COVID. So, whether in terms of consistency you stick with that, I'm not too sure. But, given when you look at the sort of players at Leicester, even with the injuries that they do have up front, when you think about the likes of Vardy, I'd be reluctant not to put Van Dijk in there. So again, I think it's just a case of who partners him. Personally, I would want to go Canate. I'm really impressed with what I've seen of him, and when he came on against Leicester the other week, it sort of helped us massively in terms of getting the draw and then ultimately winning with the penalties. So I would probably go Van Dijk and Canate. That's no discredit to Matip, but I just want to see more of Canate, and then obviously Alexander-Arnold and Tsimikas are a shoe-in, and as is Alisson.
Yeah, definitely right. So Theo's been outvoted on that one. Canate can get the nod to start at centre half. Hannah, I'll come to you then for the midfield. What are you thinking? Obviously, Fabinho and Thiago both set to be back. Do they come straight back into the 11?
Fabinho definitely. Thiago, given he only came back, yesterday, I think. So maybe that's one where you sort of give him a little bit more time. I think probably be named on the substitute bench, but I think it's a different case of whether or not you start him. Fabinho definitely, and Henderson as well is a must. It's just a case of, for me, whether or not you put Milner, Keita, or Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain in there. Personally, I want to see more of Naby Keita. I'm not sure if Naby will be one that plays against Chelsea, given that Thiago will have, been back a bit longer by the time we played Chelsea. But I think given how Naby changed the game against Leicester the other night, I want to see more of that, and it's an opportunity for him really to get some form and continue that. So personally, I'll put Naby in there, but then Fabinho and Henderson as well.
What do you reckon, Theo? Obviously, it feels as though it's probably time for Tyler Morton to drop out of the 11, and probably quite timely given the subsequent injury that's been picked up by Ricardo following his challenge in the League Cup meeting between the two clubs. Because if he does play, I'm sure away from home, it would be quite a hostile environment for him, albeit, of course, no malice in the challenge, but it hasn't ended well for Ricardo.
Yeah, I think it's going to be quite a spicy atmosphere anyway. We were saying it in the press box last week when you had challenges flying in, players getting injured, and just the whole manner of the game. We know about the nasty challenge that Leicester fans were coming out with. It certainly feels a lot more spice to it. And then you've got the added context of Rodgers against his former club. So even if Morton hadn't broken Ricardo's leg, I'd still imagine it to be quite heated. I'm with Hannah on that. Naby Keita has to start. He was dancing around him for fun. They all have been having nightmares about how well he came on and changed the game. So he's got to start this one. And you've also got the fact that, well, this time next week, you won't be able to play him. He'll be on Africa Cup of the Duties next week. So if he got an injury in this one or against Chelsea, it doesn't matter for the next 2-3 weeks. You can let him get a little knock out the way now. You just play him if he's on form, go away with some confidence. I'd agree with the argument with Van Dijk. Fabinho, you'd imagine, is going to be good enough to start. But then it's how energetic are him and Henderson feeling. Like Henderson didn't have COVID, but we know he was ill as well. So if they're not both 100%, you could see one of them drop to the bench, the other one is the number 6. And then it'd probably be Milner, because it would be a big, bold call for it to be Oxlade-Chamberlain and Keita as offensive midfielders, which is incredibly hard on Oxlade-Chamberlain because he has done so well when he's been turned to in recent weeks. But I'm going to be optimistic and say Henderson's fit enough to start. He got through an hour last week, and Fabinho is going to be back and raring to go. So Fabinho, Henderson, Naby Keita, in a very long-winded way of agreeing with Hannah, as I often do.
Yeah, no, I was going to say you did take your time over that. What about the front three then?
Salah, Jota, Mane, easy. In form, next.
Yeah, any argument with that, Hannah?
Not at all. I mean, Firmino, you might have a case for, but I think given Jota's form, and clearly he likes the game against Leicester. You look at his celebrations after he scored the winning penalty. So, absolutely, Jota has to go in there. I don't know if it's a case of maybe managing his minutes slightly, given he's going to be so crucial, especially when Salah and Mane go away for AFCON. But I think given that the Leeds game didn't happen, and you've had now that bit of an extended break in between the League Cup game and now Leicester again, given we've had that break, I think I'll play Jota, and then obviously Salah and Mane. We're going to lose them next week anyway, so like Theo said with Naby, you've got them now, so you might as well play them.
they had that break last week as well, didn't they? But with the Jota celebration, is it just Wolves and Leicester don't like each other? That the only reason he probably went for it, or was he actually listening to the chants and understood, and he's probably bought into Liverpool and all of that? Surely it's got to be to do with his Wolves past. There must have been something that's gone on in the game there, and that's why he loved it that little bit more.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I'd probably hazard a guess as to something must have gone on previously. But anyway, match prediction time. I will come to you first, Hannah, on this. What's the score going to be?
I think if it had ended, had Man City not conceded 3 to them, I think I would have gone with a bit, I could see Liverpool winning quite comfortably if Man City did. But seeing that they very almost got that comeback, I think it's going to be a bit more of a challenge. And I think, I'm not quite sure how many players they've got out injured, but he might be able to field a slightly stronger side against Liverpool. So I don't think it's going to be as straightforward as you might expect at the moment. So I'm going to go with maybe like 4-2.
4-2. Plenty of goals.
Theo,
what about yourself?
Make up for there not being a Leeds game.
Yeah.
It's a tough one to call because Leicester, they went so strong against Liverpool last week and it's cost them because they got a couple of injuries. And then they seem to be so weak against Man City, then they put in a good performance in the end. They've scored 3 at Anfield, they've scored 3 at the Etihad. Despite all the injuries, they've got a bit something about them. But I just don't get the management of Vardy at the moment. I know he's getting on a bit, but since they started managing his minutes more, it's when their form started to go out the window. But because they've got those 3 goals in the last 2, they're going to score, aren't they? They're at home. The fans will want to get one over Liverpool up because of last week and everything. I'll go with a 3-2.
3-2. Okay, yeah, plenty of goals in it. We'll have to wait and see how it does play out. Do remember you can follow all of the coverage across on the Liverpool Echo website. Here on Blood Red, we will bring you immediate reaction with the debrief, as well as, of course, our post-game podcast and both Jurgen Klopp and Brendan Rodgers post-match press conferences. But from myself, Guy Clarke, Theo Squires and Hannah Pinnock, thanks for your time and your company here on Blood Red. It's bye for now.